This time, however, we wanted to not only talk with Intel pros and folks from Muslim communities, we decided to reach out to some folks who have actually lived it. Joining us on our special panel tonight, we are honored to have with us Kimberly Munley, the hero of Fort Hood. She's the civilian police officer who ended the killing spree by Major Nadal Hassan when she shot him 4 times and was injured herself in the process. Also with us from the attack at Fort Hood, Staff Sergeant Alonzo Lunsford, shot 7 times, including once in the head, along with Sergeant Sean Manning, who was also shot multiple times and went on to be a vocal critic of the Obama administration for initially describing this attack, for years they did, as workplace violence. Rosa Leonetti is with us tonight. She lost her brother-in-law on 9/11. Also with us, Joe Connor. He lost his father to FALN terrorists in the 1970s, then watched in horror from across the street as his own cousin died in the trade towers. Some of you may recognize Patience Carter. She spent 3 hours as a hostage during the Pulse nightclub terror attack in Orlando just a couple of weeks ago. Shot twice, her friend died next to her on the bathroom floor during the standoff. Also with Patience during that 3-hour nightmare in Pulse nightclub was Tiara Parker. She was shot once by Omar Mateen. It was her cousin who died on the bathroom floor next to her during the standoff. Sergeant Robert Bartlett is with us tonight. He was severely injured by Iranian-made IEDs while on duty in Iraq, as is Carl Higbee, a Navy SEAL who watched 3 of his buddies die, also thanks to an IED in Iraq. With a different perspective, we have Imam Hamad Ahmad. He argues that radical Islamists do not practice the true faith. Teresa Hubble is here from New Jersey. She represents that group we like to call security moms. Brigitte Gabriel survived a terror attack as an Arab Christian growing up in Lebanon. She's now an anti-terror activist. Ron Kubi is a defense attorney specializing in civil rights. Salam Badi is an Islamic attorney. Bernie Carrick is with us tonight. He's the former NYC police commissioner who oversaw the New York law enforcement response to 9/11. Mohammed Shulri is communications director for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Karen Greenberg is a civil rights attorney and noted expert on national security. Zihan Hamid is president of the Council on Pakistan-U.S. Relations. Bill Daley here tonight, former agent with the FBI. Qasim Rashid is a Harvard fellow in the Department of Islamic Studies. Bo Dietl is here as well, a former NYPD detective. Suhail Khan is a Republican Muslim who worked with the Bush administration and with the RNC. Courtney Emerson is a writer and activist who studied women's rights in the Arab world while at Princeton. Sohab Ahwan is a Muslim writer, and Chris Jani is a Muslim convert. That is our panel with us tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. Very grateful to have you. So let's just start with the status of terror today in America. And for that, I'm going to start with our 2 guests who were in the Pulse nightclub and ask you something that so many people have said to me anecdotally over the past couple of weeks, which is, can you believe how quickly it has faded from the national conversation?
I think something like this shouldn't be taken as a trend. It's not a trend. This is an actual issue that Americans face.
Extremely frustrating. I mean, it took them 5 years to actually say ridiculous based on the facts. I mean, they knew from day one that it was a terrorist attack, and they refused to acknowledge it. And it seems like all these attacks, they try to reframe it into another narrative to try to avoid talking about the difficult things.
What did you think when we saw that in Orlando when they scrubbed the reports of this terrorists pledging allegiance to Allah? They changed the word Allah to God. They scrubbed out Islamic State references.
Exactly the same thing. Again, they're trying to misfocus the public at large and try to create a narrative that isn't factual.
Rosa, when you suffered a loss on 9/11, and of course that was the terror attack of them all here in the United States.
You know, my niece just graduated from high school here in Manhattan and is going to Boston College. And when I look around and I don't see her father, and I see my sister sitting there crying 15 years later, I'm so angry. We've rather be politically correct at this point than call it what it is and pander to the political correctness just for votes, just for power. 15 years later, we have learned absolutely nothing.
Joe, you've been involved, you've been the victim of and had somebody you love in 2 terrorist attacks.
Yep.
In the United States.
Yes.
Have we made any progress? I mean, when you look at how we're handling it now.
You know, it's an interesting point. I mean, I'd say we do talk about political correctness, and it used to be sort of a nuisance in our lives. Now it's a noose, and it's killing us. It's choking us. It's around our necks. And I think that's one thing that I think most Americans have learned. I'm not sure our government has learned it. And I think we have to understand that. When my father was murdered in 1975, it was a Puerto Rican terrorist group. They went to prison for a long time. Until 1999, when politically it was expedient for the Clintons to release these terrorists. So they did. So Hillary Clinton was involved in their release when she was running for senator from New York. We're still seeing some of that now. I mean, you look at what happened with Benghazi. You look about how terrorism has been used for politics. And what you said is, in a lot of ways, we've learned nothing. And it's very frustrating to me. I mean, as a 9/11 family member, and I witnessed the attacks, and my poor cousin Steve Schlag was murdered, and my father, who was his godfather, was murdered a generation before. You know, I see that we did come together for a while after 9/11, and we went to war to avenge that attack. And then I look what happened with my father, and we released those terrorists, and it was all for political reasons. So I still struggle with this dichotomy between how we have fought a war on one hand, but how we pander and give in to the politics on the other. And it's disgraceful. We should be way further along in our war against terrorists now than we are.
The question is whether anything can be done now about the metastasis of ISIS that happened during the last couple of years, I mean, in particular since 2014. And we're going to talk about that next. We're going to talk about the Obama administration's response and what can be done as this group has popped up in so many cities and so many countries abroad. Because this terror threat has clearly evolved. And the critics say that President Obama's response has not. Up next, we'll investigate that. Don't go away.
We will not rest until we have dismantled these networks of hate that have an impact on the entire civilized world.
Welcome back. When Omar Mateen killed or injured almost 100 people at the Pulse nightclub, there was a range of reaction from the Obama administration. While the president and his team initially acknowledged that this was clearly a terror attack, they went on in the coming days to focus on a range of issues that had little to do with identifying terrorists. Listen.
The shooter was apparently armed with a handgun and a powerful assault rifle. This massacre is therefore a further reminder of how easy it is for someone to get their hands on a weapon that lets them shoot people in a school, or in a house of worship, or a movie theater, or in a nightclub. And we have to decide if that's the kind of country we want to be.
We stand with you to say that the good in this world far outweighs the evil, that our common humanity transcends our differences, and that our most effective response to terror and to hatred is compassion, it's unity, and it's love.
I want to bring back our panel. Let's just pick up with what Loretta Lynch said there at the end. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Go ahead, Carl Higbee.
Passion and love, they're talking about, loving the very people that are trying to tear us down. We need to look at this on multiple fronts, and one of the fronts is we have to be willing to fight this enemy head on with force, but also we have to wage a social war too. I mean, you have, let's say 10% of Muslims are radicalized and willing to do harm, 20% are perfectly willing to live within our customs and our ideology, but then you have that 70% in the middle that's unwilling to report the suicide vest that they see from their friend or report the radicalization of anybody they know. You also have America that is afraid to speak out. We need to fight this on all these fronts, and it's not going to be done through love.
Anybody else? Go ahead, sir.
Well, it's interesting hearing these made-up statistics. 10% of Muslims are radicalized. I assume that was just invented because it sounds like a good number. 20% aren't willing to report. You can talk about criticizing political correctness, but that's a bumper sticker. That's a slogan. That's not a strategy. That's not a plan. And the notion that, take Omar Mateen. Okay, this was a racist, homophobic, misogynist, domestic abuser with serious mental health issues.
That describes, by the way, most of these terrorists.
Well,
most of these Islamic they're all the things you
okay,
just said.
that's fine. But where does he end up? He ends up as a juvenile intake officer in the Florida Department of Corrections. Were they too politically correct? Then he ends up working for one of the world's largest private security agencies. Were they too politically correct? I mean, this is not a single-dimensional problem where you attack Muslims or political correctness or demand a whole community come out in a daily denunciation that no other community in this country is asked to do.
One of the conversations that's been lost here is that Megyn was an abuser. And there's ample data that indicates that those who are abusers will become further violent and commit mass violence. The FBI just released a report on this.
Are you drawing a line between the fact that he was a radical Islamic terrorist and the fact that he was a man who abused his wife?
I'm saying,
are you trying to say this is the extreme act of a female abuser?
I'm saying that what we have in America is a country where the leading cause of injury to women is domestic violence.
Let me get one of the victims of his attack to respond to you. Go ahead, Tiara.
I mean, it doesn't matter whether you show a person love or not. You can show somebody all the love in the world, but that doesn't change his actions or some of the things that he's done. What he's done was a terrorist attack. Now,
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that I'm showing something against Muslims or anything like that. However, he still acted as a terrorist, and that's what he did.
He was a terrorist, and there's no one doubting that. I think if you doubt that, you're delusional. There's no doubt he was a terrorist. My point is to the comment on what love and compassion and education can do. If we use those to train our youth and to focus on our youth, when we're talking about how to end terrorism, it doesn't happen with more bombs and more guns. It happens by getting to our youth sooner and younger and creating a narrative for tolerance early on.
Okay, Mohammed, go ahead.
So, one terrorist who claims to be Muslim is one too many. So whatever the percentages are, to me, are irrelevant. But I think the solutions here is to look at a proven model versus shallow theories.
Well, how is this practically going to be applied? Are you telling all the other Muslims that they need to become this kind of Muslim?
So
that doesn't sound very productive.
No, so what we're doing is, so two things.
Quickly.
One is we've launched a True Islam campaign where we've looked at 11 points that the extremists are using to radicalize these terrorists. And we're saying, here's the counter narrative. So a short-term solution, law enforcement, all those things
you need
are
to
great.
go to the mosques and get them to repeat that.
And the problem is inconsistent Muslim leadership.
And I bet probably they have not responded. And the problem is you are the minority. What we have right now is Muslim mosques in America radicalized, harboring terrorists, knowing that there are radicals within the mosque, and they're not reporting about it. And when we talk about the issue of terrorism, you have the gentleman in the back, the perfect excuse of how he can hijack a conversation about terrorism to make it about women, and the guy was an abuser, and therefore that's why he did what he did.
Let me tell you, what we have is the largest organized Muslim community. We have over 100 sites, 70 mosques in America where they're wide open. Police, law enforcement, we're open.
The majority of mosques in America are not listening to moderates like you and moderates like Zohdi Jasser.
We're going to pick it up right after this break. Don't go away. And we're back now with our panel. Bo Dietl, you wanted to weigh in.
I listened to the gentleman next to me. We're talking about Sharia law, where you could whack your wife around. I mean, that's abuse of women. Then you get the President of the United States on television talking about gun control. Hey, the guys in Boston didn't use guns. They used pressure cookers. It's an idealistic value of they want Americans dead to a certain amount of people. What we have to do is educate the younger Muslims that this is not the way to go.
Bill Daley, go ahead, former FBI.
Yeah, Megyn, I think ultimately you have to say, stripping away all this conversation here, what is really driving these people to do it? And the thing is that they're being influenced, they're being inspired by active participation by ISIS, by Al-Qaeda to draw them in. ISIS and Al-Qaeda don't care whether these people have other aggression issues or whatever their problems are. They just want them to act out in their behalf. They don't have to meet them. They don't have to talk to them. But what they're going to do is they inspire them to do it. And that ultimately is the issue, is that we have people out there in ISIS and Al-Qaeda who are very slick marketing mechanisms who are reaching out to these people, whether by information they see on TV.
And then they pull up these Anwar al-Awlaki videos where, I mean, he's dead and he's still influencing the next generation of terrorists.
And that's what we have to get at, the crux of this serpent, which are the people who are doing it from afar, and stop it.
Go ahead, sir.
These people that are gunning other people down, they're not following Islam. That's for sure. But what's the problem? The problem is that the true message of Islam is not getting to them either. And I think it's challenged with the media, because what happens is that the media, all they portray is ISIS, Taliban, all this and that. They don't portray what Muslims are really doing in America, what Muslims are really doing around the world.
I want to ask you, Sergeant Bartlett, I mean, you were wounded in Iraq fighting by an Iranian IED. You've actually put your life on the line to fight terrorism for this country. Your thoughts on the dialogue we're having right now?
I think some great points were made. They were talking about education. We need to educate. Well, the problem is the education that we're fighting is if you look at Iran or any of these countries where these radical regimes are pushing the message out, they're saying, you know, death to America, death to Israel, death to Jews, death to Christians, death to anybody who isn't following Islam and who isn't following their version of Islam. So they've killed their own people, and they do it often, right? But now they're killing us too. And so how do you combat that? We have to combat entire regimes that are pushing out that message. It's not just a small band of ISIS members. It's a very large regimes that are pushing these things out.
Go ahead, Carl.
And, you know, these are nice ideas that we want to fight it through education and things like that and domestic abuse. That's fine and dandy. But the fact is, right now, we know that 100% of the terrorists I shot in the face didn't get back up and commit terrorist attacks. So if we have to go to their country and do that to protect the homeland, I'm willing to sign back up and go.
I'd do it.
Thought on that, Bernard Carrick, and then we're going to take a quick break.
You know, probably more than half of the people here started out with the problem is, all right? The biggest problem is that we don't have a long-term strategy. We know exactly what the problems are. This administration has no long-term strategy.
Stand by. Much more after the break. While many influential Muslims issued a statement condemning the attacks in Orlando, and one Muslim actually did report Omar Mateen as a suspected problem, it did not satisfy all the critics. We discuss that with our panel next. Well, after we learned that Omar Mateen stopped in the middle of the Orlando terror attack to pledge his allegiance to the Islamic State, some in the Muslim community realized they would again be called on to explain how folks become radicalized, and in this case, to answer for some of Islam's teachings against homosexuality. More than 200 Muslims, including dozens of American imams and scholars, issued a joint statement condemning the attacks, but that did not satisfy some of the critics. Let's again turn to our panel. So this goes back to the discussion we were just having about whether some of these beliefs are baked into the Islamic faith. And I'll ask you about that, sir. Go ahead.
See, I've studied the Quran for 7 years, and nowhere in the Quran does it condone killing of an innocent human being. It actually says killing one person is equal to killing all of humanity.
The question is how can we expand this brand beyond
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we need to do, where Americans, non-Muslims, need to understand what the Quran actually says. So when these extremists use the Quran, by the way, 97% of the people killed by these extremists are Muslims.
I know, of course.
So it's not about Muslim versus Christians versus Jews. It's about extremists killing for their own ideology, and the counter ideology that if we all come together and present.
But all of the extremists that we saw in those 7 attacks were Muslim extremists. They were all Muslim extremists.
They were.
I mean, you don't deny, because this is where people get upset. If you deny that is a real problem in the country. We saw these people in the front row had their relatives died in the Twin Towers that were knocked down by radical Muslims.
Megyn, I've had family members die.
You and then Bo.
I've had lots of Muslims have family members die from this too. It's a terrible thing, and I can empathize. But what I can also tell you is, unless you separate, what I would tell the administration today is, until you separate the extremists from the religion, and what I would tell.
This administration is doing that. Go ahead, Bo. Go ahead.
I'm saying, when someone's killing someone, Allah Akbar, he's doing it in the name of his God, and that's extreme Islam, and that's the fact. And when we start covering it up, there are good people, but the point is we have to try to get the good people to turn the bad people.
Go ahead, ma'am.
So when the interpretation of groups like ISIS are effective at recruiting people, they're also effective because these people are excluded politically, socially, economically. We know that has to be part of the conversation. And so when presidential candidates say we should ban entire communities from entering the United States, we are feeding into that fear. We are feeding into that process, which is equally a problem.
What about that? Because the studies have shown, as we saw in Orlando, that too often it's second-generation Americans whose parents immigrated, who the parents do fine because they still have their culture of origin, but the second generation, like Omar Mateen, do not do that well because for many reasons, but one of which is they feel ostracized and disliked. Go ahead.
So I mean, I can tell you as a convert growing up, I grew up in the South, and I know plenty of Christians that I grew up with, people that claimed, you know, Jesus is the greatest, and they're sitting there, they're saying that they are Christians and they live by that standard that's in the Bible, and yet we see people in those areas. I grew up watching people beat somebody of a different color. I saw somebody beat somebody because of their sexuality. sexual preference. And in that case, they're saying you're against what God says and you're against this. And it's still coming out with a Christian ideology in that case. And I personally grew up with those things. And so I saw that. And for me, I look at it and I say,
there is an entire group of people that, go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Joe. No, this is for Joe in the front.
That doesn't even make sense. I mean, we see states, Islamic states, murdering homosexuals and stoning people who have affairs and that. So it's part of the state culture, whether it's.
But is this a false equivalence?
Yeah,
in other words,
it's ridiculous. One guy going out and beating somebody is a terrible thing, but a state making it the policy that we're going to stone adulterers or we're going to throw homosexuals off a building.
Let me just ask
that's
this.
That's a different thing altogether.
Why can't you have both ideas in your head? That Islam is a peace-loving religion, but that it can be corrupted to a place where it's political and it's radical and it's dangerous.
But there's no problem.
Go ahead.
No problem ever. You know, when the Tea Party was up and coming, they had no problem throwing the Tea Party into the bus and calling them racist. Why can't they call it what it is? How do you fight something that you can't call out? You need to call it out. You need to stop thinking about these kumbaya, and your bumper sticker is bleeding all over the place.
Kimberly, go ahead.
Spare me.
Go ahead, Kimberly.
I completely agree with you because we toss up the word political correctness. Well, I'm sorry, that's the problem, because if we exclude his pledge to ISIS during the attack, we exclude Hassan being able to go up in his own free will and announce his pledge to what at the time was the Taliban, and then he switched over to ISIS, whatever's the going factor at the time, and we suppress that information. That information is not put out to the public because it's politically sensitive.
What do you think? What do you think of the push on guns? I'm curious.
The push on guns is a whole different story. They can throw that out there on every serious terrorist attack out there. That's not the problem. He was on a watch list. He shouldn't have been able to buy a weapon. That's plain and simple. But that's not the solution, because they're going to get the weapons. They're going to get the pressure cookers. They're going to get whatever they want to get to accomplish the goal.
Go ahead. I've got to go, but you go ahead, sir.
Where the problem lies is that you look at our young future leaders, just like they were saying that these kids don't have anything to look up to because our administration has failed. Because of economics, because of how they're teaching our kids. They're spending more time in teaching our kids to pass an integrated test than they are teaching about the values that will make this country great. Then when someone said that the Islamics, when they go in and kill people, they were only looking for Muslims to kill, when we got hit, Megyn signed to ask those 14 people that died that day, if you were Muslim, if you were Christian, if you were Jewish, you whatever. He just started shooting and said, Allahu Akbar. And even when we was having a trial, the man said, Inshallah, it's God's will. We got to call it what it is, because you got to grab the snake by the head, you got to kill it. And you cannot do it nice. I've never seen anybody win a fighting nice. You got to change the rules of engagement, because us military personnel here, we've been there, we've done that. It's hard when you see somebody making an IED and you can't take the person out because you got to get permission from the higher ups. That's the snake right there. As far as guns is concerned, I'm a dad and I'm a school teacher. When I went down, my son, I was a single father at that point, my son came into my hospital room. He said, Dad, from now on, if you should fall, I will step up. He knows how to operate everything in my arsenal. And that's how it's going to be. Yes, you had to fight fire with fire.
Sergeant, thank you. We'll be right back. Well, we mentioned earlier that there has now been 7 successful terror attacks carried out on the in the U.S. since President Obama took office, or about 1 per year. But here are a couple of other numbers to think about. Omar Mateen is the 103rd ISIS supported to be killed or arrested on U.S. soil in the last 2 years. 103rd. That's 50 a year. And a recent report by the Homeland Security Committee listed some 800 ISIS-linked investigations underway in all 50 states. Our panel is back with us now. I mean, that's chilling. I want to get to Karen. Just because she's been raising her hand. What are your thoughts on it?
What we should also mention in this, Newtown,
We should talk about Aurora. We should talk about the fact that the United States is in the middle of a wave of violence by young, mostly men, some of whom are in the name of ISIS and some of whom aren't. And if we keep focusing on how ISIS in the Middle East and ISIS in the United States is the same thing, which I think it is quite different in the ways it's behaving, then we are missing the point.
Teresa, go ahead.
Gun control has been mentioned. Newtown and Aurora and Orlando were all target-rich environments because people were not armed. And this push from the left to disarm the innocent, the law-abiding like myself, I am my own security. I do not have a security force. The government cannot protect us at all times. We need to accept this. We need to take personal responsibility for our own safety and security.
I want to get to Patience, Carter. Go ahead.
We're losing sight even right now with he said what he said, that tell Americans to stop bombing my country, and we need to deal with that part of it.
Omar Mateen.
Yes, Omar Mateen.
As he was shooting.
As he was shooting people in the bathroom, and we need to deal with that part as far as prevention, as far as security. What are we doing as Americans, as far as administration, to make sure that we're protecting our American people on our soil? What are we doing? If you met this man or you interviewed this person by the FBI multiple times before this even happened, how did he get his access to guns? How did he get into that bathroom to kill so many people?
Just quickly in the back, you, Sohaib, and then you, Suhail.
I understand that this is an ideological battle for those that are being radicalized in the United States. We need to establish the peaceful narrative of Islam if we're going to save these people from being radicalized. First of all, the problem that I see is that we keep fighting the media, we keep fighting the rhetoric against Islam that continues to demonize Muslims. When you demonize Muslims, you put youth like me, you put them aside and you say that your religion is going to, promotes this, then that's what they're going to accept.
I want to get to you, Suhail, because you had your hand up.
Thank you. We have to, united as Americans, defeat ISIS. We have to defeat Boko Haram. We have to defeat Al Qaeda and anybody else who in any way wants to harm innocent people, whether they're American or otherwise. And we need to do that united as Americans. And that means all Americans, whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, or other faiths, need to join together. We don't need to divide ourselves. Muslims should be on the front line. They are on the front line, especially on the local level. They need to partner with local law enforcement. If they see something, if they see somebody radicalizing, they need to work with law enforcement to stop that before they become violent. And if they're getting close to violence, they need to work with law enforcement. But that also means not trying to scare the community, and that's why this whole idea of surveillance or deporting or locking up people before they've done anything, we need to stay with the Constitution as well and adhere to the constitutional principle that made us great as a country.
I'm going to give Sergeant Bartlett the last word. Go ahead, sir.
I think America just needs to make peace with, hey, we're in a 100-year war. That's the reality. The other reality is, you know what, I've been on your show a couple of times. Muslims give me a lift to your show, right? They say, I wish the FBI would vet us so they know who we are and that we're not terrorists. So that's saying that a Muslim's telling me, hey, we want the FBI to investigate me so they know that I'm a good person. So why aren't we doing that?
Including the mosques.
But it's so hard. I mean, it's so hard for some Muslims in this country right now who see the attack in Orlando and they say, oh God, now it's going to come. You know, peace-loving men in particular who say, because of the act of this man, now I'm going to be treated like a terrorist. Now my son is going to be treated like a terrorist. People who are peace-loving.
And that's where these Muslims come in. They need to be
there has to be an understanding on everybody's part that just because you're Muslim doesn't mean you want to kill Americans.
No, yeah, they need to speak. They're pulling together, speaking up.
We are speaking up, but the point is that we speak up. Good. We are speaking up. We're Muslim scholars, several on this stage, speaking up and saying, nobody here defends terrorism, nobody here defends these 7 attacks, nobody here defends ISIS. But when we give the logic and rationale of how we can win this ideological war, we have people who don't have a shred of academic integrity saying that, oh, well, you're lying or you're making things up. We need you on our side to fight this ideological war. We can win this together. We can definitely win it.
Okay.
Maybe if we killed another 2 million Iraqis, because starting in 1991, with all due respect to my friends in the military, we have been killing Iraqis since 1991. We've killed them by the millions, and I hear here they're ready to go kill some more. I don't think that's made us any safer. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if we just kill another 2 million, we'll be a lot safer.
With all due respect, we have a lot of veterans here today who have served our country honorably, and to dismiss their service as just wanting to kill Iraqis is diminishing and disrespectful.
Megyn,
and I would ask you to keep it higher level than that.
After all of the wars that we fought, after all the Iraqis that have been killed in the name of the United States of America since 1991, all the blood that's been spilled, no doubt, heroically, we are still no safer. So maybe we should start to think of ways of dealing with this that does not directly involve killing more people or having more wars. Crazy liberal idea, I know.
I have to let a veteran respond to that, and then we are going to go.
The problem is ISIS sprung up when we stopped going in the area and we stopped killing bad guys in the area. So you can go love them and you stick your head in the sand, and then when they come back and they kill your family, I'll be there to back you up.
All right, I got to leave it at that. Thank you. Obviously, it's tough. I mean, this is a passionate issue for everyone for obvious reasons, but you guys have been respectful, and I thank you for that. Thank you all so much. We'll be right back. I want to say a big thank you to all here in our panel tonight. It's a difficult discussion, but an important one, and we thank you for watching as well. Go to facebook.com/thekellyfile. Follow me on Twitter with Megyn at Megyn Kelly, and let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Megyn Kelly, and this is The Kelly File.